Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 208 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, I have Leah Shellberg on the podcast. Leah has been somebody that has been my savior here over the last few weeks. Our attorney in our Greensboro office, Allie Dunlap, has been on maternity leave, parental leave for the last month plus, and Leah has been helping us cover some of the continuances and resets down in the Greensboro and surrounding areas for our clients in that office, and has just been a lifesaver. We talk a little bit about that in today's episode and the importance of networking and having each other's backs in the criminal defense bar, the blessing that it is to have that. But Leah is a native North Carolinian. She attended undergraduate at UNCA, where she majored in mass communication. She attended Elon University School of Law, where she graduated cum laude in 2013. She is currently the managing partner of the law office of Tony Huynh, and I have loved what Tony has done from a marketing and business standpoint in broadcasting his traffic ticket and criminal defense law office. Leah talks a lot about kind of how the culture of their firm operates and some of the business practices that she recommends for young lawyers, but very impressed with the practice that they have built in that office. She has her practice area primarily dedicated to criminal defense in 14 counties. Leah believes in practical and dynamic legal representation to ferry her clients through the court system, providing her clients with the legal knowledge and context they need to make empowered choices along the way. Leah shared this bio with me, and I love that sentence. She really has thought about how the legal process looks from the client's perspective, and I love that. In her off time, her interests include meditation, which we talk a lot about in the podcast today, and I love her thoughts and ideas about how that's impacted her law practice. She loves studying history, taking care of her 3 cats, and heavy metal. And she also talks about the importance of jamming out in her commute times to really clear the mental load. I had just a blast of a conversation with Leah. She has some great ideas about how to improve the practice of criminal defense, how to improve your personal life. She has been a tremendous help to the office, and we talk again about that relationship, and just a real blast of a conversation with Leah. I absolutely enjoyed this conversation and hope you will as well. Well, Leah, I am super excited to have you on the podcast. You have recently been my personal hero and savior, because you have been helping us cover cases in the Greensboro area while our awesome attorney down that way, Allie, is out on maternity leave. So we have been very much tapping into into your help. And so it's I just share that maybe at the beginning here. First of all, to say truly thank you for all the amazing help that you've provided us in our darkest hour, since that's our motto. But I also just share that because we were just talking about before we got on the call how cool being a part of the criminal defense bar is. And you're just a living proof of that. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate you coming on the show to share your wisdom with the audience.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am too. Yeah, no, I am too. It's been fun working with you a little bit here again over the past kind of few weeks on some of the Greensboro cases, but kind of going much further back than that tell me what kind of brought you into the crazy world of criminal defense and law school in the first place. Give us the backstory of what got you into this practice area.
So I still can't even really articulate why exactly I went to law school, other than I had been told that it would be a good idea for me.
That's awesome. Who
So
told you that? Was
my
there a
grandfather
specific?
did.
Okay, yeah, there we go. That's a
My
thing. Good.
grandfather did. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a fighter pilot in the
That's
Navy.
awesome.
I
Yeah.
saw Top Gun and I just like I fell in love with it. And then I found out that I was entirely too short and entirely too blind to do that job. And my grandpa was like, "You should just go to law school instead, kiddo."
That's a funny thing. I've heard of people saying that they either were or were worried about being too tall to be a fighter pilot because of like the cockpit space. But it's funny. Like that's a funny thing to have that. But I mean, yeah, you can't watch Top Gun and not want to go fly an airplane through the sky.
No, absolutely not. There's just no way, especially when you're like 10. Like
Yeah. Yeah, even watching the latest movie, I'm like, maybe I should go join the Air Force here, right?
right? I was shocked at how much I liked that second movie. That took me completely by surprise.
That's funny.
But yeah, so I wound up going to law school, not even really knowing why. But I had an absolute blast while I was there, which probably makes me absolutely demented. But I had a great time. I made amazing friends. I actually I actually met Tony in law school.
Oh, that's awesome.
We go way back. And as soon as I graduated, not really knowing exactly what I wanted to do still, I thought for a hot minute that I wanted to go into like intellectual property law or some kind of business law. And then I graduated and people were looking for jobs. And I was like, that just doesn't seem like a very fun thing to do. Like everybody seems really stressed out. So I'm just going to go put myself on every court-appointed list that I can find. And I'm just going to do this thing. And I'm going to try all of the different kinds of law that I can get my hands on. And I've never looked back. It's been the most incredibly rewarding career. I so love this job. I have so much fun at work every day.
Yeah, I think there can be such a benefit that, there's to me a lot of different benefits that come from being on the court appointed list. If you're not a member of the public defender's office, getting on the court appointed list and getting your kind of hands dirty on cases and meeting district attorneys that way, getting some time in the court, speaking with clients. Like it just provides this kind of opportunity. And I do, we've had, as we've kind of been doing this young leaders series that this is part of, we've been kind of talking a lot about a couple of the concerns that some attorneys have brought up about the future of practicing criminal defense has been, not necessarily having those same opportunities because of more and more public defenders offices. So I'm actually just kind of curious on your end in terms of those court appointed cases. Can you talk a little bit about some of the lessons or kind of values of being able to kind of start the practice that way?
Oh man, I learned so much doing that I would have never even really sought to learn if I hadn't done that.
Yeah.
You realize really quickly that you have a very distinct relationship between you and your law practice.
Yes.
When you're on different court appointed lists, and you really, it just made me so acutely aware of all of these things really that I didn't know, right? Like law school did not in any way prepare me for the business of being an attorney, for example.
Yeah.
The court appointed list sure did, or at least it made me really aware real quick and in a hurry. I didn't know how that worked.
It was very clear that we didn't know how to run a law firm being on that list.
Very much so. We were a little clumsy at first.
Yeah.
But I mean, everything is, and I think the most beautiful thing about court appointed work for me is that I learned really quickly what it really means to practice law. as opposed to, you know, a lot of other different kinds of career paths where it's not really a daily practice, where,
Yes.
you know, part of the gig is to make mistakes and or learn how to do things differently and better the next time, and just, you know, to continually build on that. And court appointed work was a very quick and very humbling way to get the hang of that real quick and in a hurry. And as soon as that kind of clicked in my head, that nobody was like automatically good at this thing like overnight in all of the different ways, you know, like I was very clumsy as a business owner. I've always, court is like my favorite place on earth. That part has always been very easy. That's always come really naturally for me. But being like the office backside of things is like a completely different ball game. And I needed to know that about
Yeah.
myself. That was really important for me to know. And I think that those kinds of realizations are, you know, like you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck out of court appointed lists when you're just getting started. I think for sure. It was some of the best experience that I could have ever possibly asked to have.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like just kind of the emphasis that you just put on kind of the practice of law. And I think that that's something that has resonated a lot with me over the last couple of years is just, yeah, it is a practice. It's something that you're continually building on day in and day out. And I was just listening to this podcast about Michael Jordan and the emphasis that he placed on practice. Like his teammates, one of them said that, he would show up to practice like it was game 7 of the NBA finals and like, just bring it in practice and be trash talking and, giving hard fouls. And like, just like this was not the Allen Iverson version of practicing. Like this was, serious work. And I do think that that is, what is, I would say kind of special to me personally about district court criminal defense is the ability to really kind of continually improve your game. Like it's very cool to like know that you're never going to like reach the top. It's humbling and sometimes maybe a little bit frustrating because it's like, man, I should know some of these things by now, but it's also what keeps it fun and exciting is that it's always that learning that's going on. And so, yeah, I love that kind of emphasis that you just put on practice. Cause to me, that's the fun part of criminal defense.
Absolutely. And I feel like since I've kind of become more like mindful of that, that has like bled into other areas of my life
Yeah.
beyond, just my law practice, and very much so to my benefit.
Yeah,
Life is practice, man. It's
it is. Yeah.
we're never done. We're always going to be reaching for more. We're always going to be trying to do better the next time around. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. That's awesome.
We're always growing and expanding, and I'm here for it. In district court, you can watch that happen in live time. It is.
That's so true. Yeah, you absolutely can. What kind of, after coming out and getting kind of your feet wet in the court appointed work, talk a little bit about kind of like maybe some of the early lessons that were learned, in practicing on your own, and or, kind of how it came about that you started working with Tony. Tony's got such a cool like marketing presence. Like, every time I go back and forth to the beach, I think I shared this with you. You see the Tony Huynh signs, across the of the 40 corridor, and it's he's really pushed on that front, and I know that you're a big part of that. So tell me a little bit about, again, early life or early practice from a business perspective side of things, from running your practice, and then kind of how that transition over into working with Tony started.
So an important note about Tony. Tony is incredible, and he is so much fun to work with. When we were in law school together, so I actually started law school a year before Tony did. So he was my mentee his 1L year.
That's awesome.
And
That's crazy. I mean, that's
like
pretty wild.
fantastic, right?
Yeah.
But Elon had this joint MBA JD program, and that's what Tony did while we were in school. So he graduated with not only a JD, but an MBA as well. Hence that like beautiful business presence, right? So basically, I think you can sort of probably see where this is going. I don't really do business very well, but Tony does. And we had gone to law school together. So I graduated a year before he did. And, I had gotten onto the court appointed list and was doing my thing. Tony graduated and did something not completely dissimilar and started his own practice. And then a couple of years into that, he asked me if I would be interested in doing some contract work for him because he was expanding, doing his traffic ticket practice into some other counties. And any kind, when you're on court appointed lists, the idea of consistent income is
it's huge.
It's like manna from heaven. So I was like, absolutely, I'm there. Like, let's do this. So we started doing that, and we did that for several years until I got this wild hair to go and practice family law only with a law firm out in Randolph County. And I did that through the pandemic, and it just was not my thing. Civil court just does not ring my bells.
That makes like we talked about before the call, that kind of makes me want to gag a little bit,
For sure. It's just not the same at all. But anyway, so I went through the pandemic doing that. I parted ways from family law. And funnily enough, I was going to just go back into practice for myself again, but I had been kind of treading water for a couple of weeks, and Tony called me kind of out of the blue one day, and he asked me if I wanted to come back. And I was like, absolutely. When do you want me to start? So we teamed back up and got back together. And then I got promoted to partner back in February with him. So
that's awesome.
We've both had quite the journey. And working with Tony has been absolutely amazing. I have so much fun at work. I know you had mentioned in some of your tidbits to think about for this, to talk about work culture a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, please do.
One of the things that I really love about working with Tony is that I feel like our work culture is very much one of work-life balance. And I am very, especially after doing family law only for a little while during the pandemic, no less, that has been absolutely life-giving for me. That's been a total game changer. I have so much joy for just existing these days with the right balance between work and life. That has just been an absolutely transcendent experience for my practice. I've never been happier to have a law license.
I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Because I think that's something that a lot of lawyers are trying to find, right? Is like a good work-life balance, or how are you using your law practice to kind of elevate the rest of your personal life? So if you have any specifics in terms of what that looks like, that would be awesome.
So for us, work-life balance is very much so we're a very 9 to 5 Monday through Friday law firm. And for me anyway, I feel like this is going to vary individually from person to person. There's no right there's definitely wrong ways to practice law, but there's definitely no one correct way to execute your work-life balance. But I feel like our hours and our work culture and us not really being expected to be, in the office, we don't do billable hours in our firm. And that's been a really big thing.
Yeah, that's huge.
You cram a lot in a 40-hour work week. You really can. So striking that balance of having a very strict routine of get everything you can done between 9 and 5, and then whatever is left over, it's just not an emergency. And we can tackle that tomorrow. It's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
That has been crucial in my in developing my practice further. And working for a firm like this, so we're a fairly small firm. We cover a lot of ground, but we're a fairly small firm. It's me and Tony. We have 2 associates, and then we have 2 paralegals. And that is our office. And we cover, I checked the distances a little while ago. We cover almost 120 miles up and down I-40.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And then we also cover a bunch of other counties, several up and down 52 and 85. And then we also go up into Danbury. We go out into Rockingham and Caswell County.
Yes, yeah, that's a lot of distance.
Go out into Chatham County. I mean, we cover a ton of territory, but we have such a good time doing it. It's definitely not for everybody, but part of what I love about it is that so I'm usually in court in like 2 or 3 different counties every day. So I get up in the morning, I get a lot of time alone in my car to listen to music and just kind of like get into the right mindset for how I want to go, how exactly it is that I want to appear in court that day. I get to really kind of deliberately choose like which Leah is going to go to
I
court
think
that
that's
day.
so important. I mean,
It is.
since we're road warriors doing the district court practice in multiple counties, I feel like using that vehicle time, I've definitely used a lot of vehicle time to make, make return client calls or whatnot and kind of do work sometimes. But for the most part, I think that it's a really healthy place to kind of relax, unwind, pray, figure out like, mentally, what's kind of on your agenda. Like there's a lot of good use, so to speak, in terms of like that free time, as opposed to it just being kind of a dead space. So I love that.
Absolutely. It's like doing your mental laundry
Yeah,
almost. Like
it
I do
is.
a lot of mindfulness practice when I'm on
Yeah,
the
that's
road.
awesome.
I've been all about paying attention to what's going on in my head because I am in my car for multiple hours a day. And I feel like it's a good idea to keep an eye on that.
It is. Yeah.
Like a big part of our job really is, like clients don't realize this about practicing law, but like our job really is to be an open channel for solutions for that person, however they might come.
Yes.
And a big part of that is, making sure that like you're managing your emotions and whatnot before you go into a courtroom. If you go in and you're this big wadded up ball of anxiety, you're not really going to effectuate a whole lot of good things for anybody in that state. It's important to be confident. It's important to be calm and cool. And I think mindset work is one of the like most important things that lawyers can really do for themselves. I think that that's such an important practice. We use our brains all the time.
Yes.
And it is so important, like we're very deliberate creatures, attorneys. We try to speak and write so specifically. I think it's definitely worth doing the work to stay on top of making sure that you're kind of thinking deliberately too, because that really is such a game changer. It sets the whole tone of your day differently.
Yeah, 100%. I think that to me with the work hours and how that plays into work-life balance, I think that that is so important. So a couple of like takeaways on my end from that. I would say, have a very similar kind of structure in terms of, for the most part, and that, there may be a week, you're preparing for superior court trial or something where you're really putting in some hours, but for the most part, it's kind of like 8:30 to 9 to 4:30 or 5, like, that's kind of the space that is expected. And early on in practice, when I was on my own, like you said, you're taking everything. So, if a client called at 7 o'clock, like I was using my cell phone as my, business phone. So, 7 o'clock at night, I was taking that call, weekends, working in the morning. And one of the real problems with that for me was that really meant I was constantly distracted at home. Like it wasn't even a matter of, even if I wasn't on the phone, I was always like kind of in that mindset of I'm not fully present here. It's really difficult it was difficult for me to have that almost differentiation of when does business end? And it really didn't, it just was like a constant 24/7 thing, even when it wasn't 24/7, because there wasn't that many calls coming in, but the brain was kind of like always in that space. And so, really having, I think, some limits is very helpful. And I also think from a cultural standpoint, it's helpful to be all on the same page in terms of at your own office, whether you have one other person working at the office or 10, everybody kind of being on the same page about what the expected work hours are. And that like after this certain time, we're gonna figure this thing out tomorrow. Like this is a situation that doesn't need to be immediately resolved. And again, there's exceptions to this. There's certain times when there really is like a fire that needs to get immediately put out. But it's truly an exception and shouldn't be like the, everyday norm of like, okay, now we got this thing to put out. So I think having the entire team have that kind of clear expectation of like, hey, we're in this thing, from this time frame to this time, and we are going to work like, crazy and go to bat for clients and have a blast doing it. And then after that time, it's like, go really soak in time with your family or unwind or time to, engage in this hobby or other pursuit that you have going on. I think that's really important. And so I think for me, just kind of listening to what you just went through, I mean, I feel like that kind of set hours really helped me to kind of be like, okay, now this is the time that I've got the ability to 100% focus on my family. And I will now literally, like, when I get home, I put my phone up by my box. If people, sometimes even if family members outside of my like immediate family are texting me, there's no response coming back until like the next day. Cause it's like, this thing is out of sight, out of mind. And I just think that that's so healthy in terms of, again, understanding that importance of separating some of that, those two realms, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I noticed I had a very similar experience when I first started practicing and I was out for myself. It was like, I feel like our brains, especially lawyers' brains, they focus really well. Whether you're gonna like whether you choose what you're focused on or not, like our
Yes.
brains are great at picking stuff. It's like a hungry dog with a bone. Like your brain will just gnaw on something 24/7 if you let it. And my brain was totally willing to gnaw on work 24/7 when I was, doing court appointed work. And, very similarly, basically I would do pretty much any kind of case that I could get in the door. Right. But at the same time, like that, looking back now, like that lifestyle versus this one now, which is much more structured and much more routine, is, like, it's just, the difference is incredible.
Yeah.
I was so stressed out all the time.
Yeah.
When I was stuck in that mode. Now on the flip side of it, I have no idea how I existed like that. Looking back, like it is not sustainable. You will wear yourself out.
You will wear yourself out. And I think that's one of those things where, if somebody's listening and they're like, man, I'm in this space of like doing it all the time. There are times in practice where you do have to have a little bit more of a, like, I've got to take every call because there's just not enough items coming, calls coming in the door, clients reaching out. But I think, you also just have to be honest about that, as opposed to being like, and recognize like the goal is to maybe move to a different space. There's an attorney here in Asheville that will, go, he's an amazing lawyer. He goes to court and is there, pretty much every day, and is there, for pretty significant amount of time. And then he does all of his consults back in his office from like 5 until pretty late in the evening. And he loves it. Like this is, he's like 100% all in on practice, and he's been doing it for like 20 years. So this is not a new recruit, but again, he's not being torn in two different places, because he's very clear, like, I am in work mode. Like, this is where I'm going to put my time. And so I also don't think that you necessarily can't work a lot of hours if that's what you want to do. But I do think you have to be honest about, either being in like kind of the workspace or being out of the workspace, as opposed to trying to kind of pretend like I'm, in both of these items. I think you will really burn yourself out practice wise and with your family or friends or other people in your life if you're constantly kind of going back and forth between these two spaces.
Absolutely. And you're so right too. Like, there is no one size fits all. Some people thrive working all the time, and as long as they're happy, then that is totally their business. Oh, I mean, even if they're not happy, I suppose that's really my business. True. Yeah. But at the same time, I also think another thing that I've noticed, moving forward through practice, is the idea of this like work-life balance thing is, like, you don't just like receive a balance degree that you can hang
Yes.
on your
No.
wall like you did your JD. You know, like balance is something that you're always doing in
Yes.
any given moment. I think about, you know, when I was a kid, my parents put me in gymnastics lessons when I was really little. And I remember standing on the balance beam and how you kind of have to like make these little like micro adjustments in your body, right? To
Yeah.
balance your weight on that beam. And
Love
it's
that.
something that you're like kind of calibrating to all the time, as long as you're up there. And balance is very, you know, in our work-life balance, it's a very similar concept, you know, like it's okay to prioritize work over other things sometimes. It's you
Yes.
know, like our practices sometimes require that, but then at the same time it's equally as important to be able to swing it the other way and prioritize time with family and time to recharge, you know, and it's okay to do, you know, like it's just as okay to do that as it is to prioritize differently. And how that looks for everybody is going to be completely individual. You really can't answer those questions for other people other than, you know, it's finding your balance is going to be like a perpetual thing. And it's going to be, you know, like the way you calibrate to that is going to be all you. But I do think it's an important and worthy exercise to look for that and to be aware of that. I feel like that can very quickly change the way that your practice looks. And it can make things go from really overwhelming to very rewarding very quickly. Um, and I
Yeah.
think, you know,
I agree.
learning that from Tony's structure has been just such a huge deal for me. It's been a total game changer.
I love that analogy of the balance beam, because again, I think that in order to have, you know, kind of a thriving practice or a thriving family life, or kind of outside of work life, you have to have one or the other be out of balance sometimes. Like, I mean, you know, if there's been a death in the family, you can't work a 40-hour week that week, right? Like, I mean, you know, like this is not something that it's like, well, you know, I'm still putting in my work time and I'm in balance right now. It's like, no, there needs to be like a sway in this other space. And the same thing on the work front, right? Especially like, I think starting out, you know, and I feel like sometimes it can be, you know, maybe it's exciting. I know I definitely had a lot of like fun in the early stages of starting the business, because it was kind of like, you know, you're playing a game the whole time trying to figure out how to make this thing work. But it can also be very stressful, like, you know, just trying to kind of figure things out, and you're, you know, on the phone on a weekend or late at night, and, you know, trying to figure out how to respond back to clients that are calling while you're sitting in the courtroom. I mean, there's a lot of different stressors that come from that. But I love that analogy of the balance beam and how you're kind of constantly, you know, adjusting in order to stay in balance. Like, in order to kind of not go one way or the other off the balance beam, you actually have to lean that direction sometimes. So I think that that's a great analogy for it.
You. I am so pleased with that analogy myself. I was like that. That's honestly perfect.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's great.
I'm pretty sure I had that analogy come to me while I was driving. I'm convinced that I did absolute best thinking in the car. It's
That's funny. Yeah, that's
ideas just like pop out when you're driving. It's wild. You'll think of solutions for things that you hadn't even really been thinking about. It'll just pop up. And you'll be like, wow, that I have no idea where that even came from, but cool. You know, it's
is that something, I mean, in terms of like kind of that thought or mindfulness time, are you kind of, what does that actually kind of look like in terms of is there music, you know, silence? Like, what does that look like in terms of how you do that? Because I do think, again, like having that mental health space, like for me running, that's like my free mental space time. And, you know, I will listen to podcasts and music sometimes on runs, but sometimes it's just so awesome to go out on a run and just have nothing going into my head. So I'm curious, like on your end, what that like kind of looks like in terms of kind of getting to that space where you really can have clarity of thought.
it totally varies for me too, honestly. You know, there are some mornings where I get in the car and I just want it to be quiet. There are other mornings where I get into the car and I immediately want to listen to like heavy metal, you know,
Yeah.
or something to kind of just like get things moving. And there are a lot of mornings. So I'm an avid meditator. And I have been meditating since like 2017, I think. And I've made it part of my routine every morning. I
That's
do it
awesome.
like a community service at this point. Like I owe it not just to me, but like also to everybody else for me to take like 15 minutes and do that each morning. So a lot of the times I'll hop in my car and I'll listen to a guided meditation. I use the Calm app. That
I've
was my
heard some great
that was
stuff
my
about that
gateway
app.
drug.
So yeah, that's awesome.
It's an amazing app. But I'll do like whatever the daily calm meditation is. And then sometimes I'll want to be quiet. Sometimes I'll want to listen to music. Sometimes I'll just turn on like ambient background noise, depending on like what it kind of like where my brain is at that point in time. And and it just really varies. Sometimes I get a lot out of just like being quiet, and other times it's just as useful to listen to some loud music and you know and I just kind of surf that wave, however it happens to be on any given day. I do think music is a magical thing for
Yeah.
mood, especially if you're in your car a lot. I think paying attention to what kind of media you digest, whether it be music or podcasts or whatnot, I think paying attention to that is important. I've noticed, people. I've seen a lot of discussion about how if you're listening to like true crime stuff on a really regular basis, it might be something worth paying attention to. And I think there's a lot of reason behind that. I think that there's a lot to be said for thinking about what kind of thoughts you're putting into your brain on a regular basis. I love true crime. I think it'd be hard to find an attorney who's not into some kind
That's yeah.
into some kind of legal something or other as an entertainment form, right? But I do notice that when I listen to stuff like that, like I tend to be a little more anxious afterward.
Yes,
I tend to be a little bit more paranoid. Like it definitely affects your psyche a
it
little
does.
bit.
Yeah, 100%. And
So I kind of
especially with the ones they do now that are so long. I mean, they really can get into, multiple episode detail about, the psychology of this, you know, murderer or whatever, whoever it is. I mean, there's definitely a lot of it's your brain is definitely spending a lot of time in that space.
absolutely. You're right. They do like the content for that does just get like bigger and bigger and bigger. We went from like episodes of 2020 to
Yeah.
like now you can watch like 8 hours of it on Netflix and
Yes.
shot
Yeah.
if you really want to. But I also think like I said, that being aware of those things is really crucial, especially for attorneys.
Yes.
There's a lot of information that like flows through us on any given day that is, especially if you're in criminal law, you hear about some pretty gnarly things on a pretty
Yes, you
regular
do. Yeah.
basis. And I think it's important to kind of like counterbalance that a little bit. Do things that make you happy and feel good
I
and
agree.
pay attention to your narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a super important thing to spend some time on because again, as for those that are listening, I mean, for the most part, you're covering multiple counties. You're spending time in your car, and it really is like one of the, generally speaking, like few moments that people have to reset like during a workday. And so I just think that that's such a huge part of the process is being able to make sure that from a mental health standpoint that you're staying strong is really being attentive. Like I think you've kind of used that language of like really thinking about what you're thinking about. I mean, and it's important because I do think you get into a habit so often of just this is kind of like how I spend my time in a car. It's this like race of kind of getting through my next list of calls, or I'm always in this like kind of rushed mindset. I'm frustrated about like I need to be in my next spot. And so yeah, I mean, I just think that for having a really healthy practice, being focused on making sure you're at your kind of mental peak as often as possible is really important. And what you feed your brain is just as it's more important than what you feed your body, as important as that is. But if you're feeding it, negative news and again, while it can be fun, stories about pretty awful things happening to people, that's like, man, that's you're getting a lot of that on the day to day anyways.
Exactly. And it can get grim in there.
Yeah,
Like
it can. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it. Well, no, thanks. Thank you for sharing that. Cause I think that that's just so helpful to kind of have some thoughts on that front. In terms of kind of, currently practicing, if you were talking to, your associates at the firm and trying to kind of like maybe give some advice on being able to kind of contribute to the business success of the firm as a younger lawyer. And so again, obviously this is meant for, anybody in the audience, really, partner, associate, whatever. But what advice would you give to a lawyer that is a member of a firm, at any level, to help, kind of push the success of the business? What does that look like?
I think at the end of the day, the best piece of advice that I can give for something like that is going to come from my very non-business mind. But I think the most meaningful contribution you can make to a business, even if you're not a business person per se, is your relationships. I
100%
think your
agree.
relationships are everything. I think that a lot of attorneys don't think about that when
Yes.
they first engage with law practice. But, ultimately, especially in the criminal defense world, like it's all about relationships. It's about your relationships with the DAs, relationships with other attorneys you see in court, relationships with clerks, relationships with bailiffs. I always try to learn everybody I can at the courthouses that I go to, like I have, because you never know who could possibly help in any given moment. Like I've had janitors point me in the right direction before. And it been the difference between me being on time with something or a few minutes late because I
Yeah.
had to go to the clerk's office to find out instead.
Yes.
Your relationships are everything. And you don't really think about it when you're creating them, but at the same time, like those relationships, like when you start combining all of those together under one roof for a business entity, you can get some incredible momentum going with those. Your connections are, everything. And you can, like I said earlier, practicing law in criminal defense land is a team sport for sure.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
it's, like you're all players in this. And, like I think that in terms of a business, those are, like two key things that you can keep in mind while you're out interacting on behalf of your firm, regardless of whether you feel like you're really in the know on how a business works or not. Because that's really what I started to do. And lo and behold, my very business minded partner decided to make me partner for it. So,
Yeah, no, that's so huge. I think, you had shared, I think it was prior to us starting the recording, how you believed that was, that practicing law was a team sport. And you're talking about it in the context of being a solo practitioner. And I think that that's such a cool way of looking at criminal defense, because I agree 100%. And it's also interesting because there have been a number of very similar answers to that question from the other attorneys that have been in this kind of like Warriors in the Courtroom series about the importance of relationships, and that is kind of the number one driver of a successful business, really in any field. But I almost want to say in the service industry that we are in the practice of law, it's even more important than it is in other businesses, because it's really, if you want to say we're selling something, it's really that relationship. I mean, we're basically 100% like kind of putting our reputation out there as somebody that can be trusted. Like really, that's the fundamental building block of the attorney client relationship is trust, but it's the fundamental building block of any meaningful relationship. And so I think that is such a cool way of focusing. And I think the other reason it's so cool is that it just gives something tangible for everybody at the office. And this is really true for non-attorneys as well. But if you are focused on taking care of the relationships that you have within the business, so, whether it's your clients, first and foremost, other members of the team, people that are your colleagues in the bar, like you said, obviously all of the different people in the courthouse space, clerks, bailiffs, judges, DAs, if you're focused on taking care of all of those people, again, whether you're the one answering the phones or having the, attorney-client consult, that's really like the magic. I mean, I really do think that it's simple in the sense that it is repeatedly been offered, but I do think it really takes a lot of energy because we can just get so focused on time as lawyers, and where you get kind of crunched for time. One thing that often happens is you kind of cut relationships short, whether that's like, basically I've got to get off this phone call right now. I've got to run to the next space. And, so it's a difficult thing to kind of calibrate that mindset sometimes, but I love that answer and 100% agree. Relationships is the key.
Well, I would even go so far as to say that, like to a point, if you really focus on nurturing your relationships, you can defy time.
Yeah, you can.
Yes. You can be in multiple places at once. That's so true. Done everywhere. I mean, like you can, it is amazing how much return you can get out of one 9-to-5 workday if you've nurtured a bunch of relationships with people. You can just do so much more that way than you ever could alone. There's absolutely no comparison to it. And honestly, I think that, you mentioned earlier about how running a business is kind of like a game. To me, that's really kind of the game is,
yes.
Making friends, basically getting paid to go and make friends in all these different places. So then if you get in trouble in one of those places, you have somebody who's gone and gotten to know everyone there and knows how it works. Like it's just the coolest. It is
cool. Yeah.
Play. It's
It is. And I think that, everybody that, that has kind of offered that answer in terms of relationships are incredible people, like that, and so I feel like that's one of those things too, where this is not from some like point of, manipulation. Like if you're trying to engage in relationships to get something out of it, then that's the wrong approach. I think if you go in and you're just really concerned with taking care of other people, taking care of the, your client, again, people on the team, in the courthouse, whatever it might be, it really is. It really, like, I love the way that you just said it. It's so crazy to get paid to do that. Like, I mean, it's just like how it's like this. I can't believe that this is a job. Like, I'm just getting to go help other people, and somehow there's like a financial benefit to doing that. And so it really is, again, like, I think that's part of the reason why it feels so magic, is because it's like, this doesn't make, to some extent, doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. I think we're taught as kids a lot that like being an adult's not really supposed to be fun. But this job is fun, or at least it definitely has been for me.
So, in terms of kind of advice for lawyers, again, kind of in our current space, here in 2024, practicing criminal defense law, what would be, in your opinion, some of the opportunities that exist for criminal defense lawyers currently?
So it's really interesting you're asking me that today, because I just did the online training for the Odyssey e-file thing that's launching. They're starting it in Guilford County later this month on the 29th. I know it's coming for y'all soon.
It's coming. Yeah, it's coming out this way. We've got a couple of offices that have started it, and then obviously Allie went on maternity leave at the right time. Let somebody else figure some of that out.
And I think that I think it's a cool time to be an attorney, because we're really kind of in 2024. All of a sudden, here we are moving from a very like paper-based world into what looks to be a completely digital world. And I think it's going to be an interesting time to be an attorney. I think that it's going to, after I just did the like very basic hour-long portal training video earlier. So I'm going to just be super upfront with everybody and wholly own that I still have no idea really how that actually works. Like I think I have more questions now than I did before, when I didn't even know what it really was like going to entail. Right. But I think that being dynamic and flexible and being willing to move with the times and willing to try to do this in a new way is really going to be the biggest opportunity of practicing law in 2024 in the criminal defense world, because it's about to become completely different. It's going to be so different than what we're used to. We're used to, we're used to a world with wet signatures where we can just like go up to a judge and have them sign an OFA recall after the ADA signed off on it. We could take it to the clerk's office and file it and be done. But, like that's just not where this is going anymore.
Yes, it's not.
And
Yeah.
I think a lot of us I'm realizing now, so I'm 11 years into practice now, and I'm realizing that the lawyers that I used to like roll my eyes at for like not really embracing technology, like I'm that lawyer now, because I totally, like we were starting this portal training, and like, I absolutely want to dig my heels in and be like, I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like it. It's different. I don't. But the reality of it is, like it's not gonna go away. So we're going to have to be willing to learn it, and we're going to have to be willing to work with it. And that's going to probably mean practicing law in a way that like we haven't really imagined yet. And that's, on the one hand, that's kind of daunting, but on the other hand, I think that's a really cool opportunity. We get to be trailblazers in a world that really has like been oblivious to technology in a lot of ways, and very slow to adapt to technology. We are in 2024, we are catching up with the modern times, and we're doing e-courts.
Yeah, it is.
It's going to be different.
Well, I think that's so important. And it's, there can be bad technology. So again, I think that there's been frustrations with e-courts in terms of some of the tech aspects of that particular software. But I think we've been talking a lot on this episode about mindfulness, which I think is really important. And I do think that having the correct mindset when it goes into e-courts is incredibly important, because I think that it can just become a bitch session in terms of like, we're going to just all complain about, what technology is coming down the pike. And in reality, like if we do have this opportunity to really think about, how the practice of law can be improved, and, how we can embrace some really amazing opportunities for us, again, that will save time, that will, save our clients time. And, how can we come into this, there's so many places, that being able to do an electronic signature in life has been incredible. And so it's kind of like, it's very interesting that there's so much opposition, or kind of like, lack of movement into this space. And again, I understand that there's some real problems with some of the technology itself. And I don't know if it'll get worked out with this round of software or something coming down the pike in the future. But I 100% agree that like, if you can go into it with a mindset of like, how can we really embrace the positives of some of this, opportunity. It really is opportunity. I think that that's huge. So I really love that.
It's definitely going to be, my first response to it was like, oh my God, I hate it. Because we're so
You're not alone.
And then like make things happen and get it done. But I was thinking about it earlier, and very similarly to what you just said, like e-signatures have been an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And while there will definitely be a trial period where we have to like figure out how this is really going to work best, ultimately it could really streamline a lot of things in the legal system. Yeah. And the potential for it is incredible.
It is incredible. So, yeah. I feel like even if you just think, and again, you're just talking about, kind of how to leverage relationships to kind of equate to more time. If you can kind of figure out a way to get the software to kind of match what the need is. I ran over to the courthouse this morning to get a limited driving privilege, and it took an hour and a half, to by the time I drove there, sat in court for a little bit, got the judge to sign, took it over to the clerk's office. And it's crazy to think of being able to do that from your desk, to be able to like basically submit paperwork with payment. It goes to the right person. Judge gets to review. I mean, there really is, so many places where, needing to drive over to a courthouse and appear in front of a DA or judge is just not really necessary at this point. And so I think that there really has to be there has to be technology that supports that. But at the same time, we just have so much opportunity to kind of get a client what they need faster if we are able to embrace this kind of new wave of lawyering. I mean, it really is like, I think it's going to be a mindset shift of, how, and then you can get other people that are innovators that are able to say, well, how can we get this thing to crank faster? But using our, computer databases from the 1980s seems to be a little bit like a little bit crazy at this point to be, having everything run off of, just such really outdated software. I mean, it really is. It's a crazy thing, to be in an industry that is just so far behind.
Yeah, for sure. And I again, like my reticence at first, I'll totally own, but you're right. It's absolutely a mindset shift. I just, like sometimes you have to work yourself through things like
Yes.
that, and kind of hold your own hand and be like, hey, like this is change and it's different, but
Yeah.
it's okay. And I think this will very much so be okay because it will, it's going to it could in theory make things so extraordinarily efficient once we get all the different like workflows for it sorted out. But at the same time, like while that'll be a whole process, it's totally what you make of it.
Yes.
You can either dig your heels in and it can suck, or it can be a fun experiment where, we get to ask some cool questions and, like maybe make a system that will actually serve us better than the one that we've had. Because I'll be the first to own that doing everything on paper, while we're used to it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way either. So I'm open to this, and I'm here for this. It's absolutely going to transform the way that we practice law. It's going to transform the way courtrooms work, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out for us.
Yeah, it's, I think again, just from a personal practice side of things, there's been a few times in practice where we've changed technology, whether it's, case management software or, calendaring, whatever the kind of, software change that we've adopted has come. It's been a huge growing pain, either to go from like paperless, from paper to paperless, to change from this system of case management to this. And so there's always been like moments in that transition time where it was like, this was probably a stupid decision. Like this was dumb. Like, I don't know why we're doing this. But then once you come out on the other side of it, it's like, man, this is operating so much better. But it takes that real like growing pain, frustration point when, especially if something that is as big as e-courts, where you have, across the state, probably hundreds of thousands of people that are getting impacted by this from a court personnel standpoint, clerks, judges, DAs, attorneys, on civil and other areas. I mean, just it impacts so many people. And so I think, again, it is going to be painful. Like, I don't think there's any way to get around the pain, but I think that, recognizing that change is painful, as I think it's just another good way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big part of it too for us is it's just such an unknown. And
Yes.
that's so weird. I feel like lawyers, we're not really good with situations where
We
we don't
get paid to
kind of
know
know what's coming.
what's going to happen in the courtroom. That's that's the predictability is our currency,
Surprise is not my thing. Like that is I'm not into it at all. And I think that this has been a really interesting transition because, like initially I had no idea how to even really imagine what this was going to look like, how this would even like begin to work on a computer. But I'm happy to report that now that I've seen some PowerPoint on that. Like it's starting to, I can sort of see how this is maybe going to kind of knit together, and I'm here for it. We'll figure this out. I do think it's going to be really awesome to be able to execute things from the office without having to physically go to court. I think about all the times, you know, like you mentioned that LDP taking you an hour and a half. You know, I think about all of the errands that I've run over
Yes. Yeah.
to go and knock something like that out, or to get an OFA recalled somewhere, you know, like, and that time stacks up so quick. To be able to do that from the office could potentially be really incredible.
Yeah. And I think that the frustration point is that, you know, now when you file LDP online, you know, in Mecklenburg County, you know, I've had attorneys tell me that, you know, it hasn't been signed in 2 weeks, you know, it's, you know, and so, you know, it's not creating the efficiency that it should. And again, I don't really have a good systematic understanding of where that problem point lies, but I think it's one thing to say, well, this system isn't working, versus to say, like, you know, electronic filing altogether should be scrapped. And so again, I feel like that's why that mindset is so critical.
I think the mindset's really important too, because you can kind of pass that along to clients as well.
Yes.
You know, it was really weird to start saying this, but I've started briefing our Guilford County clients to let them know, like, hey, this thing is happening on April 29th.
Yes. Yeah.
And I want you to know that, you know, it's going to very much so affect how long your case takes. And that, to be completely honest with you, I have no idea either how long I really expect for that. But I want to tell you so that you're aware, and it's not a surprise when it happens. And so far, people have been pretty understanding of that. You know, people are cool when you tell them, you know, like, again, with not really liking surprises, when you tell them that you can't really tell them what to expect, so they can at least expect that it's an unknown variable. I feel like that just like helps control the client situation so much better. Because then they don't feel like they're just like completely lost at sea.
Yeah. I agree 100%.
Roll out.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, Leah, as we come to a kind of close here on the podcast, kind of final question for you in terms of, again, it seems like you have a real affinity for your brothers and sisters in criminal defense, and, you know, just a really great example of relationships and helping other people. You've certainly been very kind to us here over the last few weeks. And so, what thoughts do you have in terms of improving the criminal defense bar at the local level?
So I think the best way to really improve the local defense bar is for members of the local defense bar to really remember that this is a team sport. And to remember that all of the different positions within any one courthouse are all equally important, and that, you know, all of those positions are like totally valid and legitimate, and everybody has something to contribute to make the justice thing happen in any given situation. I think, you know, and I don't want to, for the most part, all of the counties, so I go to a ton of different counties, right? And I have been really pleasantly surprised at how cool almost every county that I have been to has been. Really, I've had such a good time getting to know all of these different local defense bars. But the thing that I have noticed is you can definitely tell when somebody is not really a team player.
Yes.
It's definitely just it's a very different vibe, and it definitely changes the dynamic of how things happen in the courtroom. It changes how efficient they are, and ultimately, I think that it can really come out. It can affect how well you represent your client at the end of the day, if you're not willing to really see it as the team environment that it really is. So I think that the best thing that I could really recommend for the local defense bar is to remember that it takes everybody, and that, you know, we all want to see the same end achieved when we go to court every day. You know, we're all ultimately in this because we wanted to be a part of the justice system, right?
Yes.
You know, and we're all really in this because, you know, that's something that we very much so believe in.
100% agree with that sentiment, because I think that when you have a team mentality that is designed really to improve the value that you're providing to your client. I think when you can focus on, how can I best serve my client? Because I feel like most lawyers that are practicing criminal defense law really do kind of get into it from some sort of a service mindset. It's not, I wouldn't say like, a financially sexy place to go into, like that's not what is selling that. It's people that really kind of like, are interested, are passionate about criminal law, or, really want to go to bat for somebody that's been charged with an offense from a personal reason or kind of past experience. And so I feel like when you can look at playing the team game, both with everybody in the courthouse, I kind of think about district court as this like orchestra that is going on, and you can tell when there is a squeaky instrument in that orchestra, right? When the DA is rolling and the judge is rolling and the clerk is on their game and the bailiff is got everybody prepped when they walk into the door and is taking the affidavit over, helping get documents back and forth to the judge. And then the defense lawyer comes in and, is the squeaky instrument in that game. It's like, man, you really notice it. You can really feel that. And so I think, both in that setting as well as not having that competitive mindset with the other lawyers in the criminal defense bar, but that team mindset really does best serve your clients. Like if there is a bad policy that is coming from the DA's office, it's much easier to kind of push back on that collectively as instead of individually. And so again, you're bringing a different value to your client by that collective effort than you would if you just went in and went to bat for your individual client, or, like, we're going to take this thing to trial. It's like, maybe there's a better collective energy that can help push that through. So I 100% agree with the team. I've never thought about, especially from like a solo practitioner's perspective, as this is a team game, but it totally is a team game, even if you're the only person in your office.
Absolutely. And, I found that looking at it like that has, like I've learned so many different cool things, coming at it from that perspective. I have, like there have been so many times where I've, been taught something by somebody in a county that I haven't really gone to very many times that's specific to their local bar that was so important for me to know,
Yeah.
like moving forward in that county. And if I hadn't been treating it like it's really a team effort, if I had been going in there with like a chip on my shoulder and, like not being willing to not know things and not being willing to, be nice to people around me and willing to talk and form relationships, then, my practice would suffer for that. My clients would suffer for that. So I think it's just, and I honestly also feel like that's what makes law so rewarding for me, is that, like it just thrills me that at the end of the day, it's really all about your relationships.
Yes.
That it's really, like your case law knowledge will get you far, but at the same time, like it won't take you the whole way.
No, it won't. Yeah,
You have to have other people. Like there's no other way around it. You cannot do this job alone.
Love it. Yeah, no, that's such a great answer to that question, Leah. And yeah, I think that there's just, we really do need to kind of focus on that team spirit. I feel like, criminal defense lawyers, we have a pretty sweet gig in terms of having, generally speaking, in bars across the state. Again, I know you guys cover a lot of territory, as do we, and your kind of understanding or just real life experience of criminal defense bars across the areas that you guys are in is definitely echoed on my end of things. I mean, we just have such a great group of lawyers across the state, and the more that we can foster that, to me, those local bars, the better off we will be in terms of serving our clients and getting justice in a bigger sense, of a much bigger way than we could by ourselves. So I love that takeaway. So, well, again, Leah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your experience and wisdom with the audience. It's been a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute blast. Thank you for taking the time to have me on.